Hi, I'm Sarah Smith, and I want to talk to you about how the New Mexico legislature works so that we can all be more effective when we are advocating for change with the legislature. All right, so let's jump into this short presentation. To be effective, we really have to understand the system that we're working in. So I'm going to talk about how bills get introduced, how they move through the legislature, what happens in the committees, what happens after the floor vote, some potential bills of interest for this year's session, and strategy for making sure that we can be effective without getting burned out. Now, I have never worked in the legislature as a paid worker, but for the last few years, I've had quite a bit of experience in understanding how the legislature works. So since 2021, I have been advocating for specific bills and against specific bills, along with different groups around the state. I have written some of the bills that have been proposed. I've also been asked to analyze bills by legislators, as well as serve as expert witness to give testimony during hearings. So I'm going to share the things that I've learned from that experience, which is really just through the School of Hard Knocks. Don't do this in any sort of professional capacity, but I want to share with you what I've learned. Okay, so let's talk about how bills get introduced in the legislature. Now, a bill has to be sponsored by one or more legislator in order to even be introduced. The governor herself cannot introduce bills into the legislature. She has to have somebody sponsor that bill. And so even if she sets some specific priorities for the session, she can't introduce those bills. She's going to have to get some Democrats or Republicans on board to sponsor those bills and actually introduce them so that they can go through the legislative process. The sponsorship of bills is very important, especially right now because we have a very strong Democrat majority and Republican minority in our legislature. The Republicans are really outnumbered. And so if the Democrats don't like something that the Republicans are trying to do, they can just stop it. Now, I myself am an independent. I don't consider myself a Democrat or Republican. I'm not talking about one versus the other. I'm just saying in general, this is the way it works. And you've got to understand that when you are looking at bills that are being introduced. And some of the bills that will get introduced, for instance, by Republicans will just never get heard in committees because the Democrats don't want to hear those bills. And one thing that's really unfortunate is that a lot of times the legislature votes in lockstep along party lines. So all the Democrats will vote the same, all the Republicans will vote the same. And that makes it really difficult to get anything moving if it's not something that the majority, which is the Democrats, are wanting specifically. Now, right now, the governor is having a hard time because a lot of her party isn't aligned with her anymore at this point. She's really pushing for crime bills that the Democrats don't usually want. And over the last few years that she's been in office, she has really kind of ruled the legislature with an iron fist. She's been known to chew out legislators who don't do what she wants. And so that's kind of all coming back around now where she's wanting something that they don't really want. And so she's having a hard time getting them on board. And that's why you see the governor right now really appealing to the people to say, your legislators need to know that you're suffering crime issues, because they're not going to listen to her necessarily. But if their constituents are telling them what's going on, hopefully that might make some impact in the long run. Now, as the bills are actually going through the legislature, there are some specific deadlines. Bills can be pre-filed for about 2 weeks before the session starts, but only the incumbents can actually pre-file bills. So that means the new legislators who just got elected for the first time or just got re-elected for the first time, they're not going to be able to actually pre-file those bills before the session starts. Only the ones who were already in office during the previous session will be able to do that. That means that those people will have a head start because to some degree, the bills are kind of in line behind each other. And so the first ones that get filed are generally some of the first ones that are going to be heard. Now, in New Mexico, we have a little bit of a strange setup as far as the way that our legislature works. Every other year is either a 30-day session or a 60-day session. So on the even years, like last year, it's a 30-day session, and the bills must be related to what's called the governor's call or related to the budget. Now, what that means is that if it's a bill that isn't related to something that the governor is interested in hearing, those bills don't even get moved into the legislature. They don't start going through the process. I think that's way too much power for the governor personally. Now, on the odd years, like this year right now, 2025, we have a 60-day session. And in a 60-day session, any bill can be filed. The topic is not being limited by the governor. However, they still have to be filed within about the first month of the session. So for this session right now, bills have to be filed by February 20th. Now you can actually go on the New Mexico Legislature website yourself and see the submitted bills. And you can see a huge list. And when you pull it up, you will see these different bills listed. You'll see the HB, HB1, HB2. That means House Bill 1, House Bill 2. If it's a Senate bill, it'll say SB. So those designators kind of let you know which ones got in line first. You can see which sponsors are listed for each bill as well. Now for this slide right here, you can see some of the bills that have been introduced. I don't expect you to be able to read this, but I want you to look at how many you're seeing on here. This is only about half of what has been introduced so far in the session right now. This is about 100 showing. Over 250 bills have already been filed as of now, even though we're only about a week into the session. Generally, in a 60-day session like what we're having this year, we will see over 1,000 bills get introduced this session. So there's going to be way more bills than can ever be heard. And as advocates, we need to pay attention to that and understand what that means. Most of these bills will not actually go anywhere. And so we could waste a lot of time and effort and energy fighting bills that will never even be heard in a committee. Now, once a bill gets submitted, it will be assigned to specific committees. The bills have to get passed in all of the committees they are assigned to in order to move to the next step. So if a bill gets stopped in a committee, that's it. It's dead. It has to go through all of them. Once it has passed all the committees that it's assigned to, it can then be voted on the House of Representatives floor, which would mean the entire House of Representatives, or the Senate floor, which would be all of the senators. Once it has gone through that whole process in the House or the Senate, it then has to go through the same process in the other House. So it has to be passed by both the House of Representatives and the Senate before the governor can sign it into law. Now, remember, I mentioned that there are specific committees that each bill is going to get assigned to. You can see which bill is assigned to which specific committees if you look on that same list where you could see all of the different bills. So you can see there's these acronyms, and those stand for the different committees, which you can look at on the New Mexico Legislature website. If you click on the committees tab, you can see all the different committees that are listed. That's where you can find out who's on the committee and also find the schedule for those specific committees. Now, as an example, you can see here at the top, HB1 is the feed bill. The feed bill is going to be in every session. You will see it during every single session that there is. And the reason is that's basically the bill that is allowing them to pay for the session itself. So you can see that that bill has actually already gone through all of the committees. You can see it says passed through these different committees, and then it says signed by the governor. So she has already signed it. That one's ready to roll. They always do that one first because it's just paying for the session. But then you can see that the rest of the bills on the list, they have committees listed. They haven't been heard yet, and they haven't moved through those committees quite yet. Now, the leaders of the committees and the leader of the House of Representatives and the Senate, they have a lot of power over what actually happens during the session. So the chairs of the committees in both the House and the Senate are going to set the agenda for those committees. Similarly, the Speaker of the House for the House of Representatives and the President pro tempore for the Senate will be setting the agenda for those floor votes. So if these leads of the committees, leads of the Senate, leads of the House, if they don't like a bill, they can kill that bill by just not scheduling it. If they don't put it on the agenda, it will never get voted on. So it becomes really important that these heads of the committees are actually open to this bill, or else it can just not be heard. I've seen a lot of different ways that the committee chairs can also suppress bills in other ways or promote bills that they really want. I'll give an example. The paid family medical leave bill that just went through one of the committees this week, they didn't accept any Zoom comments for that one from the public. They said the microphone wasn't working, which seems interesting to me. I have seen that happen in other committees as well, where sometimes the committee chair doesn't like a specific bill and they will limit public comment. They might say, oh, I'm only going to allow 5 comments. They might limit the amount of time that people can speak. I've seen them stop particular bills by not just not putting it on the agenda, but putting it on the agenda at a time when it's going to be really inconvenient. So for example, a few years ago, New Mexico Freedoms Alliance, we were working on a specific bill, and we were actually trying to get a bill to protect bodily integrity. This was in early 2021. We knew vaccine mandates were on the horizon potentially, and we were trying to get ahead of that by getting a bill through the legislature to say we will protect bodily integrity. Now, what ended up happening is when that bill got assigned into the health committee, the head of the committee didn't want to schedule it. And so we started applying public pressure. We had people sending postcards and letters. We had people delivering flowers to the house, trying to pull out all the stops to see if we could get this particular bill to at least be heard in the committee so it would have a chance to keep moving. Because we were trying to protect New Mexicans from vaccine mandates, which obviously, ended up coming later on. Now, they didn't want to hear the bill. And so yes, we started applying a bunch of pressure. We were calling, we were filling up the inbox, we were sending emails, doing all those other things. And the committee chair finally relented and said, okay, fine, I'm going to schedule your bill. Well, he scheduled it for a Friday, and he scheduled it for the end of the day Friday. By the time all of the time delays had stacked up from the day, from the House floor and all the different meetings, our bill didn't get heard till about 10 o'clock at night on a Friday. What does that mean? That means half of our public commenters weren't even there anymore by then, right? I mean, the committee meeting went on forever before it even got to our bill. It was so late. And then he also severely limited the amount of time. So we thought we were going to have a certain number of people who were going to be able to speak, and he basically just cut us off. Several of the people never even had a chance to speak. Then we watched those committee members talk about how we didn't need a bill like this. There was no need. Bodily integrity was already protected in New Mexico, even though clearly it wasn't. But that's what they said. And then they voted to table the bill and killed it right there. So it never even moved past that first committee, and they never even voted on it. Tabling it is basically a cowardly way of saying, I don't want to go on the record and publicly say that I am for or against this bill. Let's just table it so we don't even have to vote on it. So that's something kind of demonstrating some of the shenanigans that will go on if there is a bill that committee chair or those committee members don't want to hear. There are a lot of ways that they can really try to stop it from moving. I have also seen when there is a specific legislator who gets kind of on the bad list or the blacklist, that they will not schedule that person's bills. And this is really frustrating. I'm sure it's very frustrating for the constituents who elected that person, but the committee chair has the power to do that. And even if the bill goes all the way through committee, passes all the committees, then the Speaker of the House, Javier Martinez, right now, he could just still not schedule that bill to ever get voted on the House floor. And same for the Senate with Mimi Stewart. So we have some serious concerns right now about this because there are some crime bills that we really need to get pushed through this legislative session in order to increase our public safety. And all the crime bills are going to end up going through the judiciary committees. And Senator Joseph Cervantes from right down here, Doña Ana County, he has already publicly stated that he didn't think we needed more laws. And he has historically been very resistant to any of these types of crime bills that we think we need, and the types that our chief of police has said that we need for Las Cruces. So that's going to be a big hurdle for us right now in this session to get what we're needing out of it. Now, public comments are very important. So as that bill is moving through the different committees, people can sign up to make a comment. And public support or opposition could make or break a bill. If those committee members actually listen, and sometimes they do. Sometimes they will basically ignore us, and you can tell they already decided what they were going to do ahead of time. But on occasion, you can actually see votes start flipping depending on the comments that are made. So it's a great way to support or oppose a bill to go ahead and sign up for a public comment. You're typically going to have to do it ahead of time. And so you need to be paying attention. You need to see when that bill is getting scheduled to be heard in the committee. You're going to have to go ahead and sign up. And this is a schedule that you can find through those committee listings that are on the New Mexico Legislature website that I already talked about. That's where you can find out what's being scheduled. Now, however, those schedules change rapidly. And so you might think, okay, I'm going to sign up and talk about that bill tomorrow. And then when you go to actually do it, they're running 2 hours late and they didn't even get to your bill. Or they just randomly decided they're going to move it to another day. So you have to be really nimble. It's a little bit frustrating, but they do at least accept Zoom comments at this point. And so we as the public need to take advantage of that and be ready to do that. If you're going to make comments during the committee meetings, please take the time to write out your comment ahead of time. They are going to be timing you. And so If you know, for instance, you're going to have 3 minutes, then you need to time your comment and make sure you're going to have it come out the way that you want so you don't get cut off in the middle of your comment. The other thing is I would recommend that you always have a shorter version of your comment ready, because at any time that committee chair could say, okay, I'm limiting comments to 1 minute each or 2 minutes or whatever they decide. And so when that happens, you don't want to be caught flat-footed and then not really know what to say. So make sure you have your nice, longer version of your comment that's nice and persuasive, but then you also want to have your short version ready to roll. Now, whether you are going to actually make a public comment or not, anybody can watch the hearings in the legislature. So again, on the New Mexico legislature website, which is nmlegis.gov, you can go and click on webcast. Once you get to the webcast, you will see a calendar and you can see any hearings that are happening any day. Now, this actually is a nice historical archive as well. If you wanted to watch some of the hearings from last year, you can do that. Just pick that date on the calendar. So you can watch which ones are happening right now. You can watch the ones that have already happened in the past. And this is a really good way for you to get prepped and understand what kind of comments and what kind of rationale is being used for or against this bill that you're interested in. So let's say, for instance, you want to testify or you want to make a public comment on one of these bills. You could watch the previous hearing and see what kind of objections were being made to it, see what kind of promotion was being made for it, and then you can use that to tailor your comment to kind of dial in to where your messaging needs to be. So once a bill has made it through that whole process, it's gone through all the committees and got approved, it's gone through the House and got approved, or the Senate, then went to the other chamber, gone through the whole process. At that point, the governor has the power to sign it into law or to veto it. The governor may choose to veto a bill, and if she does that outright, she will generally give some sort of a rationale for why she's vetoing the bill. But the other thing is that in New Mexico, there's what's called a pocket veto. And this basically means that if the governor just doesn't do anything with that bill in a certain amount of time after the session ends, it will be pocket vetoed and it will automatically be rejected and not become a law. As an example, in 2023, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham pocket vetoed 21 bills. And so that's something that we have to watch out for. Getting through the committees, getting through the House and the Senate, that's just part of it. The governor still has to give her concurrence generally. So let's talk about some specific bills that we are watching for this session right now. As I mentioned, crime is a top priority. It sure is for here in Las Cruces, where we are having a lot of problems with repeat offenders who are being deemed incompetent by the courts, and then they're basically just released and they keep committing crime after crime. Some of these repeat offenders have over 100 charges and they just keep getting released, even with violent charges. So competency is one of the bills that's going to be really important. And what that is actually doing is there has to be some sort of a mechanism in New Mexico for involuntary commitment of people who have mental health problems so that they are not just going to continue destroying our community. That's a tricky bill. I mean, you're taking away somebody's rights to be living freely, but at the same time, this is something that the government's going to have to deal with because we can't allow these people to continue terrorizing the community. So there's going to be some competency bills. One of them has already been introduced. There's at least one more that is expected. And we're going to need to comb through those very carefully to make sure they're really going to handle those repeat offenders and the specific situations that we've got going on here. We also would like to see some changes to the bail reform. I haven't seen a bill like that submitted yet, but that's another thing that's contributing right now to our problems with crime because basically criminals are being released without having to pay any bail. And so we're having a lot more problems because people aren't being held who need to be held. Some other bills that have been introduced include increasing penalties for specific crimes, for drug trafficking, repeat offenses, crimes involving firearms. Now, during last year's session, there was a bill introduced to fund safe spaces for drug use in New Mexico. I was aghast at that. Most of the people I talked to felt the same way. And I'm not surprised if they do introduce that kind of a bill again. So we're going to be having to watch for that. Of course, they're not going to call it that. They will call it something like overdose prevention centers or something that sounds really nice. And the idea is that they are providing a place where there is a nurse present or some sort of medical personnel who can help deal with an overdose and prevent somebody from ODing and dying. But they're basically at that point saying, come do your illegal drugs here. You can do any drug you want, any amount you want to. And I think that's really destructive. So we'll be watching for that bill. There will also be a lot of attacks on oil and gas production in this state. And so it's bizarre to me that our state government is really attacking the source of its own funding. But they're going after it in a lot of different ways. Some of the bills introduced so far are trying to, for instance, use children as a way to say, oh, you can't produce gas around children because they need to be protected. So there are a few different ways that that's going to be attacked, and we're having to watch for that. Of course, it's no surprise that the green agenda is pretty high as well on bills that will be coming out of this progressive run legislature. And so we are seeing some different bills which are trying to do things like assert the right to having a clean environment. And, some of these things that maybe sound like, oh, that kind of makes sense. We do want to have a clean environment. But if you think about what this really means, it's giving our state government a lot more power to use this as a weapon against us. I mean, that is basically what they do. We have seen the governor do that, and I'm sure there will be other legislators and governors who will be willing. And so we have to really look at these laws with the long-term goal of making sure that our state is able to function as a place where people can be free and healthy and well, and not have the government overreaching and really dictating what we can do. An example of that right now would be, for instance, the governor's administration pushing for very specific benchmarks on the sale of electric vehicles, and basically pushing out gasoline vehicles and saying that by a certain time, a certain number of electric vehicles have to be sold. And what that's going to do is basically just drive people out of state to buy cars. It's going to really hurt the local car dealers here. But if somebody wants a gas car, they're just going to drive to Texas or Arizona and get it. It's not like it's going to stop them. It's just going to harm the New Mexicans. We will hopefully be seeing some good bills related to education, some school choice bills. Hopefully we will also see some bills related to women's rights. But again, in this legislature with the current makeup of Democrats versus Republicans, unless some of these bills are going to be introduced by Democrats, the chance of them moving is going to be really low. And of course, under this governor, we can expect to see attacks on Second Amendment rights, the right to bear arms. And we're already seeing that. They have proposed a bill that is being fast-tracked right now. It's moving through the legislature that would basically remove due process, so that if a police officer declares somebody to be a danger, they can seize the guns immediately. It doesn't even have to be bought off on by a judge or any other sort of process. And so that's a real huge attack on people's rights to be able to have those firearms. We would expect other ones as well, because we have seen they will tend to throw many different bills at the Second Amendment during these sessions and hope they can get a few of them across the finish line. Another big important bill right now is the Paid Family Medical Leave Act. And some of you, if you've been watching New Mexico politics for the last few years, you've probably heard of this before. That's because last year there was a really strong push by the Democrats to get this bill passed. Now, we need to be clear about what this bill is. It sounds nice. Oh, if you have some sort of a problem, you can take leave and make sure that you will still be earning an income while you're taking leave, and the state will pay for you. But where is that money coming from? The way this is going to work is every single employee in the state is going to have a big tax increase. Every employer of 5 or more employees is going to have a big tax increase. So they're all paying into this state managed fund. Self-employed people also are going to have to pay into it. And then employees will be able to take up to 3 months of leave per year. I mean, it's going to be rolled out somewhat gradually. It won't start with 3 months, but within a few years after passage of the bill, that's the goal, for employees to be able to take 3 months off. And while they are taking that time off, they're getting paid by the state, and their employer can't really replace them. They have to keep that position ready so that when the employee is ready to come back, they can still step right in. So if you think about what that's going to do to small businesses, they can't operate that way. They can't operate if one of their employees just leaves for 3 months. I'm also very concerned what this might look like for healthcare, for law enforcement, some of these vital services that we are already short-staffed on in New Mexico. If we end up with more people taking leave and having those services be even more short-staffed, I think we could end up with some really big problems. Now, again, this is one of those bills that maybe sounds nice to the average person who's not really thinking too critically about what it means, but all of us are going to have to be paying higher taxes here at a time right now when cost of living has gone up a lot over the last few years. A lot of families are already struggling, and now we're going to have this new tax getting imposed on everybody, all the businesses. Now, if you think about what a tax does when you start to increase the taxes on a business, there's really only two things that can happen. The business can either have fewer employees or they can raise prices for goods and services. That's it. And so in the long run, what you're doing is either driving some people out of the workforce or increasing the cost of living yet again. Now, the problem is that as the founders of our country knew, humans are not angels. Humans are not going to make the perfect decisions. You are going to end up with people who are going to take advantage of this system. Absolutely. We know that's going to happen. And you have enough of those, it's going to completely bankrupt it. And the rest of us are paying that money. Now, this particular bill, like I said, last year they tried to get it passed. They tried very hard to get it passed. They really thought they had it. But at the last minute, a few of the moderate Democrats voted against it. And it was a shock at the time. There were legislators crying on the floor when the vote happened. Since then, what has happened is that the more progressive Democrats in the state have targeted those moderate Democrats. So an example would be Willie Madrid down here in Doñana County. He was one of the moderate Democrats who had voted against the paid family medical leave in response to huge outcry from his constituency that that is what they wanted. And they basically targeted him in the primary. They ran somebody against him and got him out of the way so that he didn't even have a chance. He wasn't even on the ballot in November. And they did that with several races. They managed to flip a few of those seats. And so we've got a really tall, steep hill to climb this time, but we are going to continue trying, absolutely. So let's talk about how we can actually do this effectively during the session right now. As I mentioned, there will be over 1,000 bills. So we could get really overwhelmed and lost in that. That's a lot to keep track of. Most of them will never even be heard in a committee. Now, one thing that the public can do in general is get on some email lists from people who are tracking bills. I'm tracking bills for New Mexico Freedoms Alliance, for instance. There are different organizations who are tracking different bills, and I will send out calls to action every week to say, okay, these are bills you might care about. If you want to take action, here's how to do it. And we specifically partner with other organizations so that we can do this in a way that makes it very quick and easy, so that if you need to go fill out one of these calls to action, it'll take you 1 minute, literally, just to do one. We've got it all filled out. There's an email ready for you. All you have to do is go in there, add your information in. I'd highly recommend that you change the subject line of your email. When you change the subject line of your email, it makes it where your email is going to stand out in the legislator's inbox. So if they are getting a bunch of emails that all have the same subject line, they're not even going to open them. They all look exactly the same. But if you take a minute and just change the subject line of your email, then it's going to stand out and it's going to have a higher chance that they're actually going to read what you said. Now, we know that fatigue and burnout is a real risk during our legislative session because it moves so fast. There's so much going on. And because of that, what we're going to be doing this year is focusing specifically on bills that have passed their first committee. Those are the ones we're going to put most of our effort on because those are the ones that are starting to pick up a little bit of steam and might actually go somewhere. For the next 7 weeks, please plan to just devote a little bit of time every week to sending these emails or calls. If you have a little bit more time, it'd be great if you sign up to do public comments. But all together, we can really work on this together across the state. We can really push back against some of these destructive bills and advocate for the ones that we need. Now, if you have any questions about this, please feel free to put your questions in the comments below. I will try to answer whatever questions come in. If you want to subscribe for the weekly legislative updates that I'm sending out through New Mexico Freedoms Alliance, you can do that at this website, nmfa.us/subscribe. Now, the particular areas that NMFA focuses on are crime, education, parents' rights, health, and constitutional rights. So those are the types of bills that you will hear about on our email list. There's a few other email lists if you want to learn about some other particular types of bills, but I would highly recommend you get on one of these lists because it's going to make it easier for you to get involved. We need everybody in the state to get involved at this point. We're watching our state be destroyed over the last few years. We're watching huge overreaches of government power. And the only way to change this right now is to try to really slow down the progressive agenda that's working through our legislature right now, really support those moderate things and those crime bills and things that we need so that we can try to get some change in the meantime until we have our next election when we can hopefully see a little bit more shift so that we don't have such an unbalanced legislature. I'm standing with all of you for health and freedom in New Mexico. Thanks.